Hey guys, this is Alice. I'm the founder of SalesKickstarter, and today we're having a pretty exciting news. We're having our first ever interview with one of the advisors and partners of our team, and this is Furkan Karacam. Word to you.
Hello, Alice. So I'm very happy to be here. It's great to be discussing what we're going to be discussing. So I'll start off with a brief introduction of myself. I'm a lawyer specializing in investment, funding, startups, and specifically AI startups, to be precise. And in the past, I did advise many Turkish startups as well as startups from Eastern Europe through their journey from incorporation to exit. So this entailed assisting them in the funding stage, assisting them in big sales. It also included assisting them in corporate restructurings when they're doing flip ups, wishing to go to a different jurisdiction, and all that kind of stuff. So before doing this with startups, I did also see the investment side. I was acting for counsel to investors in my corporate experience, let's say, when I used to work for these big law firms. I did see the deals from the investor side and from the enterprise level corporate entity side. So I'm trying to bring that to the table this time for startups.
Pretty much exactly the background that we really want to see here. Yeah, that's what's happening. So obviously, Kickstarter has a major interest and plenty of expertise working with AI-based startups. So usually those
Mhm.
guys are B2B guys and they are trying to do their best to enter the European or American market and sell to enterprises. That's obviously a goal to be able to sell the high
Mhm.
tech. Still, we face some gray zones. There are some objections in regards to the security, data security, right? So
Mhm.
another one is how actually other companies would react to a startup with an AI model that they're not sure yet in. So, this kind of thing. So if we're outside of sales, we get the sales, to get the sales traction and to show to investors that it's a good, place to invest into.
Mhm.
And then if we're talking about funding, also there's a set of questions. So how exactly we can solve these two things for a start? Funding for AI-based startups and entering enterprise level sales.
Let's start with enterprise level sales first. Well, the thing with being able to conduct enterprise level sales for a B2B startup, I would say, would be a big milestone, probably, right, in its journey. And you develop a perfect product. Your team is great. The everything's smooth. You've done the troubleshooting. Everything's ready. But the enterprise level corporate entity is looking for more things than that. It's looking for good administrative packaging, let's say, right? So, because in these entities, the decision makers are not always the main stakeholder,
Mhm.
what they are looking for is to minimize the risk and the accountability they would have for onboarding new solutions. So they want to lower the accountability. They want to be on the safe side. And for this, through the agreements they purchase new solutions or services, let's say, they want a fair and reasonable distribution of risks. So in order to distribute the risk and take on some of that risk as the startup, you first have to know the risk. So one of the things you talked about is, let's say, private data,
Yeah.
personal data. I'm personal data.
Yeah.
If you're a startup that is engaging with personal data, the decision maker in your potential corporate customer does not want any potential liability first on his or her own person and then second the company, right? So you
Yeah.
need to assume some of that responsibility as much as possible. And that's mainly done by two ways: by preparing your company to be able to take on that risk, where you're confident that you're complying with the laws and where you're
Yeah.
confident, where you can say, all right, I will take this risk. And the second one is communicating your acceptance that you're ready to take the risk. And that's through contracts, actually. So consider this as a packaging, like I said, activity
Yep.
function in which you package your product and the user knows through the contract, through the corporate structure, compliant corporate structure that has prepared the service, that it will not face problems when it becomes a customer.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. This is exactly, I think, the first thought to have even before, executing the go-to-market strategy when we're talking about the major sales happening. Exactly. So if we are, let's make it into the bullet points. Let's make like top three advices that you would give to, let's say, SMB level startup that, let's say, does automation of some sort, or they're working with like an ARP working with AI. So what would be top three recommendations to comply or like to take as an action to make this happen, to make the enterprise sale happen?
Yeah, so well, I won't be able to give a direct answer right away because the other issue we have here is where are we located as the startup and where is our potential customer located at? So this is important as well. This is important because of a legislation and regulation point of view, but also from a culture point of view as well. So let's assume, for the sake of this interview, that we are in the EU and selling products or services to a EU company. So with this presumption in mind, you definitely need to first get your data processing and personal data processing compliance done. So that's not even a question. Even in countries outside of the EU, which does not take personal data processing requirements as serious as EU, not getting this done and not reflecting that you have done this to the highest extent possible in your contracts is a deal breaker. So this is number one. This is the thing you need to focus on, is getting compliant with as much laws and regulations as the market asks you to be compliant with. Now, the government asks you to be compliant with everything. That's another story. But there are other ones that are enforced, let's say, in a way by the market, as you cannot do any business if you're not compliant with them. So identifying those for your field and then complying with them. So these might be very different based on the industry you're serving. If you're serving hospitals, there's a whole different level of regulations you need to comply with regarding healthcare. So if you're doing transportation, if you're doing law enforcement, if you're doing agriculture, so there's also these specific regulations you might be subject to based on the industry you're serving, which would actually shape their expectations of you. And there's also, like I said, some general go-to things if you're processing personal data. So getting compliant with these is number one, to the highest extent is pragmatically reasonable, let's say. All right. The second one would be for the sales team and the sales effort to understand where the compliance level stands at. This is important to conduct talks and negotiations without actually giving any misrepresentations, let's say, without misstating your level of compliance. So it can be a big red flag if you are found out, if the company you're trying to make sales to finds out that you're not as compliant as you said you were a few days ago on the initial engagement, let's say. So that's the second important thing. And the third important thing is, if we have to restrict it to three, communicating that you're open to taking the risk, that you are well aware of the measures you need to comply with, and that you're willing to compensate, indemnify the buyer of your services if that buyer is required to pay any fines or any compensation to third parties because of your wrongdoing. So the contract stage, that would be the contract stage in which you also do a big deal of corporate communication.
So if let's say there is a team that on average is like 10 to maybe 20 people. It's not always about, big resources having in pocket. So how exactly can guys of this size comply with all of this? So So how your team helps out with this? Is there a kind of responsibility you can take on, or is it possible to do on your own, like with an outsource and stuff? So what are your thoughts on the services, like in regards to this?
Yeah, that's, I think, a very good question because, well, it's a matter of evaluation, let's say. So there is this, I did take a few economics classes back in college, so I'll try to talk with those terms.
You're good.
I believe it was diminishing marginal utility, the word, the concept. So
You
the
remember it precisely.
your compliance effort, every dollar you put into compliance has a diminishing marginal utility. All right. So in the beginning, it's very useful. In the beginning, you really need to make the basics done because they're red flag issues. And if you don't get them done, you can't do business. But after you reach a certain point of compliance, which I would say reflects the market standard, additional additional efforts into getting an even higher level of compliance might not always be ideal. So there's a sweet spot there where you should actually just be okay with, so to speak. So finding that sweet spot is not something the startup usually can do on its own.
Yep,
All right.
exactly.
That's the
That is where
value.
the question comes. Yep.
Yeah, that's the issue. So you need to know the industry you're working with. That's number one. And number two is you need to have an understanding of whether fines, for example, are probable. Possible, they are possible in every
Yeah, every
infringement of
niche.
regulation, but are they probable? So, and
Mhm.
this requires a legal perspective into the issue. So I think the extreme approaches would be wrong. One of them being, let's put lots of money into compliance. Let's have a huge lawyer team come into the company and scrutinize everything. That's not a good idea for a startup. But also letting things loose without any professional guidance, let's say, from a legal practitioner, also would result in an utility that would otherwise been achieved rather cheaply, let's say. Exactly, exactly. Now, we like our team to be a bit more precise. This is exactly how we think we add value. So we do say, all right, this action is in the gray zone, but that's where you should stand. You don't have to be all 100% white, so to speak. You can stay in a few levels of grace, and it doesn't stop on that too. As the life of the startup progresses, the shade of gray you need to have your startup in changes as well. As you're
Mhm.
getting ready for investment, that shade changes. As you're going through cycles of, let's say, cash flow problems, and you need to let loose of some expenses, let's say, then the shade changes again. So the shade is not static, it's ever changing. And that's why guidance, let's say, or at least cooperation, whatever the correct word is, for, from a legal practitioner in real time adds value.
Right. So it would be fair to assume that the more you are developing with your sales, therefore with your revenue grow, like the sales traction, so the more revenue gain, the more markets you enter, the less dark this gray spectrum has to get. So the more defined
Definitely.
actually, your compliance has to be, your contract statements regarding the data has to be. So that this is, I think that I do get your point about the um allowing yourself sometimes just to like, that's fine. It's not that probable that it's going to be that, hacked. But like, if you are about to properly develop, and especially if you're about to enter the fundings and show the investors that, guys, we're transparent. Sales traction is based on the actual sales that are not endangered with any lawsuits. The more I have to, invest into it. So let's actually switch then to I think the most intriguing and the most exciting question of all. So all those startups out there who want to do business development and who want to get the sales traction, they're later on in their development coming to the question of, we want investment, we want proper
Yeah.
investment. So
Mhm.
how you guys are related to that, and what is that magic that you can do to help those startups to actually look out at the VC funds and say, guys, we're out here and we're ready to receive the fund.
All right. So again, the funding party also has very similar approach to, let's say, corporate entities purchasing your service. All right. So the reflexes are very similar, but the importance they put on, like you said, on which area of gray, which shade of gray you're in differs. Again, the investor doesn't want zero risk. I've never seen, in the transactions I've done, I have not seen where small incompliance issues actually break a deal. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that the funding entity, the fund, whether it be a VC or an angel investor that's doing its job correctly, wants to be able to assess the risk and see the picture clearly. So this requires, how do they see the picture? Let's say from a legal standpoint, they do due diligence work. Their lawyers enter the company's virtual data room. They have access to all the company documents. They do this due diligence in which any potential risk is determined, assessed, and put in a report for the VC, let's say, in this case. And then this report is used for negotiating some of the times, but not really, because lawyers generally come in after all decisions are made regarding funding. But why it's used is it's used on whether you're going to take the risk or I'm going to take the risk as the VC. So let's say, Alice, I ask you to provide me with all your employment papers, let's say, all right, documents. You open a virtual data room and I see 10 mistakes being done between your company and your employees. All right, now I know this risk and I can negotiate on how I want to distribute this risk. Anything that you haven't given me, any document that you haven't given me, any possible fine or problem that we might encounter that you have not shared with me is always totally on you. So it's very important to be transparent. And in order to be transparent, you also need to have an understanding of what is important and what is not important to present to the investor. All right. So, and this is a process too. Now I'll take a step back from this and go back to the section where I said the fund wants accountability, foreseeability, and transparency, right? So this is done by documents as well, by the agreements you have signed, by the corporate compliances you have faced. This is a big part of it. I wouldn't say this is the entire part of it. There's financial transparency too, something totally different. There's transparency as to, let's say, conduct in the workplace policies. Yeah. But at a purely legal perspective, having proper documents, checkups, and being always ready for investment is a good thing to do. A red flag situation where a lawyer's due diligence effort might prevent an already agreed upon investment is if you have conducted and signed your contract processes wrongly, so wrong that it's impossible to revert. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're developing a software, right? That's what all of it is, a software. And while developing this software, you use another software. And in the terms of use of the software you used, it clearly states that any byproduct created by using this software is not cannot be used for commercial purposes as the kind you're intending to do. So that's something you cannot solve, not in a week, not in a month. Maybe it would take you forever to solve. Or with a client, you gave the client an undertaking that you will continue providing services for that client for a year, let's say, and you forgot somehow to have the right to terminate this contract unilaterally. You need the approval of the other party to terminate this contract. But you're in an exit situation. We're talking about funding, but let's say you're in an exit situation where the new owner, the buyer of your software, does not want to make sales to that entity. It can happen. That entity is in a geographical region that the new buyer doesn't want to serve, for example. Then you have to wait until the end of 6 months so that so that the sale can be done. So being very cautious in these places are very important, because as I've been on the investor side too, when we look at the startups documents, we try to find the worst case scenarios, and that's what we report. They do not always result in deals being canceled, let's say, but in some certain situations, very small mistakes do have very big implications.
That makes great sense. Awesome. Thank you. How about any cool examples? Maybe you can just not name, don't do the name dropping, but maybe there are some cool examples of to your mind, of the startup growth up to the landing the investment, securing the investment, where you believe that was all done properly, and how much time, the span, if it was a B2B startup, what was the time span? Let's say from the day they released MVP, if you know that, and then up to gaining proper sales traction and then the landing the investment. What was the path? How were they acting? Any tips that you maybe gained from it?
Mm-hmm. So I think, and this changes a lot, there's not a blanket answer for this.
Yeah.
But let's say the enterprise level, let's put the enterprise sales apart and just think about investing right now. When you start looking for funding on a parallel work stream, compliance should start. That's the latest. Mm-hmm. Why? Because especially if your burn rate is high, if you're not great with the cash flow, and if that's one reason why you're looking for investment, which is the case in many situations, then you do not have a lot of time for long negotiations, right? You want the deal to be done and you want to get your money. But what stands between you and the money is the investor's lawyers, right? They need to approve before the money can come in. So anything you can do to help out those lawyers before the matter is transferred to them would earn you time. Now, this is very important. Knowing what they would expect and preparing all this beforehand is very important. So let's say you need to terminate some contracts, and the contract envisages a 1 month terminating period. Well, if possible, if it will not hurt your business, do it right away. Well, not right away when you start looking for funding, but maybe when you have a certain understanding with the investor and, discussing with the investor, start doing these. Another thing you should be doing, and you can be doing actually, is understanding that not all investors are very good-faithed in the way they negotiate. All right. So let's say we agreed on an investment of $2 million to enter into the company with some valuations, but let's say we will be injecting $2 million into your company. We have the term sheets, we have a whole process of this going forward, and at the last minute, and you're out of cash, by the way, until we come to signing, you're almost out of cash, right? And my due diligence, my lawyers told me something you did not. A vulnerability in your company that you did not disclose. This gives me the perfect right to lower that to 1 million that day. And you do not have lots of negotiating power there. So starting this early on, knowing what you're selling something to the investor too. You're selling the company, actually. You're selling shares of the company. You will issue new shares, maybe you'll give existing shares, but you're selling something, right? So you need to know what you're selling. You should be talking on that. And what you're selling, what is a share? All right, let's go back to the basics. It's a fictional good, let's say, that represents a right to a company. So you need to know what you're selling. You need to present it well, and you need to be able to explain any questions a potential buyer might have, be it their lawyers or their financial experts.
Right, Furkan. So there is one more question actually that's been on my mind for a long time, and as a person having this amazing opportunity to get some cool insights from you and from the industry, what I've heard that there is a compliance act, an AI regulation of some sort, and most definitely it will be at certain point impacting the development of AI and the way that it can actually be sellable. So any elaboration that you can give us at this point, what that would be?
Yeah. So I believe it was 13th of March. The act was passed in the European Parliament. So this is a regulation in which it will have a direct effect in all of the European Union. And it's very essential, actually, if you're an AI startup. Good news is that it will take some time for the provisions to take effect. So there will be certain stages in which certain provisions take effect. It's not instantaneous. There's a window of up to 2 years, as I remember. Exactly, a window of up to 2 years, which you have time to become compliant, let's say. But the approach of the AI Act here is important to understand. So it divides AI into 4 based on the risks it poses. And at the top, there's unacceptable risk. All right. So there will be things that no matter how you do it, you just can't. All right. So this is social scoring, facial recognition in certain areas, and the alike. And there's a list of things that you cannot, under any circumstance, unless you're the government, do. And this will become, these provisions will apply in 6 months. So this is actually important to see here. So if you're doing somehow any of these prohibited activities, you will not be able to do them anymore. That's an essential thing to know, to look out for.
6 months is quite a short span, actually. If your product is somewhere in the path of being developed, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, like I can say most of the startups do not fall in this category, because this category is composed of technologies that would indeed have a huge risk and
privacy invasion.
Yeah, that I would understand. Yeah. But it's important to take a look. But like, how will this affect your AI startup if you are not within these prohibited activities? Like, it will affect you too. Now, let's go back to our previous discussions. The enterprise level purchaser will want clear indication that you understand these prohibited activities and that you can declare that you're not doing these. This will be expensive. So you need to understand, and you need to be able to communicate that, all right, we know the act. There are 7 things, for example, that we're not able to do. We do not fall into any category because this, and this. All right. So this will be a very important thing to be able to say. So there were 4 levels of risks: unacceptable risk, and then there's high risk. Now, the act mainly regulates high risk AI and, excuse me, vocational training. I've taken some notes. AI about health, vocational training, education, employment. These all fall within the high risk category. And they will have a very strict and detailed compliance procedure to be compliant. If you're selling to the EU, if you're not based in the EU, but if you're selling your product to the EU market, you still will have to comply with these. And you will have to comply with these if you're the deployer, if you're the provider. These terms are all defined in the act. If you're the distributor, if you're the importer, makes different classifications. So even if the technology is developed somewhere else, but your EU entity is bringing it in and then putting it on the EU market, it has to comply. So lots of things upcoming, but the high risk AI has 2 years starting as of, let's say, April, probably when the law is published in the official gazette, to comply fully. So what needs to be done for AI startups right now is to make sure that they do not fall within the boundaries of prohibited activities and reflect an undertaking that they do not and will not and have never been, a long sentence that we love to write, regarding that they have not engaged in these activities and will not, whatever. So this is the important thing for now that should be included in contracts right away. Starting from tomorrow, this clause can be added to contracts because enterprise level purchasers are looking forward to use your product for more than 6 months, probably. So it would be good to show them that you give importance to compliance and have added this article right away.
Exactly. Very good point to highlight if we're talking about software as a service and their subscription-based services. So obviously we're talking about a span of maybe like integrating into a big enterprise level company, integrated the solution for years, because no one would love to, to do the digital transformation again and like take something out and bring in. It's a huge expense for the client as well. So that is a very cool point to highlight that this should be submitted in the contract, in your sales contract as well. Thanks a lot, Furkan, for joining. I think we've covered most of the cool topics that we wanted to in regards of the startups, including AI in their services and their solutions. And I think the next thing that we can actually suggest the viewers is to go and book the exploratory call with Karacam and Sir, and you can just like share with us what is it that the guys can do there.
Exactly. So like I said, we are practicing lawyers in Istanbul right now, but we can offer, if even if not legal services, legal management services, in which we can direct you to the areas of concern that would be probable in your industry, in what you're doing, and we can have a call and discuss and exchange ideas.
Lovely, sure. So what I'm gonna do, I will leave the description and like the links to Furkan, his team, and where you can reach out to him or to me. And we're looking forward to see you on our social media, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.